Welcome to your lecture on exploratory thesis statements. Today we're going to talk about the controlling idea for your second essay and how to get that thesis statement up and running. So just a quick overview. Again, I'm going to review what that controlling idea for your paper is going to be, as well as the process for creating that thesis. Normally, if we were face-to-face, if you're listening to this in a remote class, we would do this in real time, but because of our remote environment, that's a little bit difficult. So we're going to do this ahead of time, and then we'll review during class. So you should be drafting as you're watching the video, or watch the video and then draft it and do it that way. But you should have something ready to go once we come to class. So what exactly is a thesis statement? There's lots of different ways you can do this. You'll have a thesis statement for this essay as well as for your research paper, but your research paper thesis will be a little bit different, but they both serve the same purpose. So this thesis statement is going to be, just like the other one sentence that presents what the paper is going to be about. For this paper, you're going to present two sides of the problem that we've been talking about with your topics. Thesis is also going to make a claim, and it's the most important sentence in your paper. So you'll hear me say over and over again that the thesis is the backbone of your paper. And I say that because it does act very similar to the backbone in our bodies, where that's what holds us up. That's what keeps us upright. That's what, we would not be able to walk or stand or, anything without that backbone working. If you've ever hurt your back, hopefully most of you are probably young enough to not have experienced that. But if you've ever hurt your back, you know how hard it is to do anything. And the thesis operates in your paper the same way that your back operates as part of your body. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this, that I do harp on it, but it is very, very important to the process of creating your paper. So the first step is to find the problem. And again, this is just for exploratory thesis statements. Argumentative thesis statements will be different, and we'll talk about that later on. But the first thing you want to do is identify a problem in your topic. So you should have your topic for your writing project. We've started this. You've done essay 1 already. So now you want to explore the problem. I'm going to give an example throughout the video, and you'll see that might help you, develop that problem a little bit. So my example topic is going to be remote or distance learning. I think it's something that's timely, it's relevant, and there still needs to be a lot of research on it. So that's my topic. I'm going to write about that hypothetically for my paper. And my example problem is, the effect of remote learning on classroom connection. So I'm looking specifically at that problem of connection, right? You're in a remote environment, probably if you're listening to this, at least immediately after I've recorded this. Classroom connection is a problem, and it's something that a lot of instructors and students are concerned about. How do we address this problem? How do we rectify this problem in our remote environment? So that's what I mean by a problem, right? We have a topic, and then we have a problem that associates with it. So the next step is going to be to find the pros and cons for this problem. Your pros will be obviously, anything that's good that can come out of this problem, and the cons will be obviously the opposite. What's not good about this problem. Problem doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. It's just something that needs to be solved. So my pros for my sample problem are that remote learning allows students to connect on their own time, meaning asynchronously or synchronously sometimes, but you can kind of work on your own clock for the most part, except for coming to class. Discussion boards will happen on your own time. Assignments will happen on your own time. It also allows shyer students, or maybe students who are a little more reserved, to communicate easier in writing or through the computer. They might feel a little less intimidated because they don't have to stand up in front of the class or speak in front of the class. And there's no forced group work. I am known for group work. I like students to work in groups. I believe that collaboration is a huge part of the learning process. And it's a life skill because you're never going to be at a job where you don't have to work with other people. So learning how to collaborate is important. But in this case, as a pro, it would be no forced group work. The cons to this, right, a classroom connection, there's no in-class support. I can support you through the computer, but I can't sit with you and, work through a thesis statement like I would during class. or help you with a paper in real time, because we're obviously not going to be writing while we're meeting remotely. It's going to be a little different. There's also less spontaneous conversation. Everything's a little bit more calculated, right? Especially if you're not speaking during our class. If you're typing, you're thinking about what you're writing a little bit more. And that could be a pro or a con. For me, I think it does, remote learning does hinder that spontaneous conversation. And it's also harder for me as an instructor to get to know my students, and it's harder for you to get to know me. You'll hear my voice a lot more than I'll hear yours. You'll see my face during class. I may not see yours. It'll be a little bit harder for me to get to know your personalities. It's not something that's impossible, but that's definitely a con to this issue. So that's what you want to do as you are thinking about your problem. Start to dissect it. What are some good things to come out of this, and what are some not so good things to come out of this? And then you'll want to start a draft of the thesis. So it does not need to be perfect the first time. I don't want you to get hung up on it being this perfect sentence. Your thesis should be one sentence, but it's okay if it's not in the first draft, right? So I have here, my first draft is very wordy and it's 3 sentences. So this was just after I looked at my pros and cons, I looked at my problem, I just wrote something down. So I have remote or distance learning changes classroom connection and dynamics. In some instances, students can connect more easily and on their own time with technology, and more reserved or shy students can communicate without the pressure of face-to-face conversation. On the other hand, there is less spontaneous conversation, and teachers and students have to work much harder to get to know one another. So this is not taking any kind of particular stance. It's just stating that remote or distance learning, it affects connection and dynamics in good and bad ways, right? So I have both of those. I don't want you to have your argument yet. You're just exploring your topic and exploring the solutions or the solutions to your problem. All right, so this is very wordy. That is not a final draft, not even close, but it's a start, and that's what I want you to work on. I want you to get a start. Next step is going to be to consolidate and put it into one sentence. So if you're like me and you start with a bunch of sentences, you kind of have to work and see what's most important in those sentences. So this is my second draft. And again, I've been doing this for a while, so it comes very easily to me to do this. Don't beat yourself up if it takes you 3, 4, 5, 6 tries to get it where you want it to be. This is a pretty basic one for me when I'm doing my own work because I'm in school myself. If I'm writing like a 10-page paper, it takes me a few tries to get a good thesis statement. So don't feel bad if you don't get it right after 2 or 3 tries. Just keep trying. My second draft is remote or distance learning affects classroom connection positively and negatively. And I have a colon because I'm going to introduce both sides here. Students can communicate on their own time and without pressure, but it takes much more work for students and teachers to create meaningful relationships behind a screen. So that's not bad, but it can be better, right? So I'm going to go into the next step, which is revising and editing. But again, don't worry if draft 2 doesn't look that different from draft 1. Focus on making little changes each time. So step 5 is, again, editing and revising. Your thesis is going to move through several versions before you feel it's ready for a paper. And again, that's okay. You're going to get feedback from me. You're going to get feedback from your peers in the discussion board. We're going to do some during class. So don't worry about it being perfect. I'd rather it be effective, one sentence, cohesive, the idea is clear, than you having this perfect sentence. So draft 3 of my thesis. Remote learning creates benefits and problems for classroom connection. While students can more easily communicate and participate in different modes, teachers and students may struggle to foster meaningful connections. So you can see it's the same information that I started with in those 3 really long, wordy sentences, and I've just pared it down a little bit each time, and now I have this very succinct and concise thesis statement. It takes practice, but I just wanted you to see that process, that you're not just going to come up with a perfect one right off the bat. If you do, awesome, then you're a prodigy and I need to learn from you. But that's okay if it's not. It's going to take some practice. Okay. So now it's your turn. This was a short lecture. I didn't want it to be too long. I'd rather you focus on those steps. And again, we're going to break this down more during class. But follow those steps and write your own draft. Make sure you're submitting it to Canvas to be ready for class discussion. And don't worry if you still need help. That's what I'm here for. I'll do a couple during class. I'll look at every single one of your thesis statements and give you feedback to make it better. So don't stress. Just get something written down, get a draft written down, and then you'll be ready to go for the next step.